Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about magic, Commander, and anything else while I try and figure out what this whole mental health is supposed to be. Now, this week we're going to talk about the Commander Sealed. I attended last week. I had a great time. I only went 1 and 2, but it was a great time raising money for charity and hanging out with some friends and seeing people I haven't seen in many months, at the very least, a few years. So, for those of you who don't know, Commander Sealed was a conceived idea by Dean Goody, and it's grown massively in the past few years. So I did see that in total we raised a total over $44,000 for the Trevor Project and the Trans Lifeline charities. I don't have much more detail beyond that. I don't have like how many people were there or anything like that, but I would have to venture a guess and say it was at least 500 on a reasonable guesstimate. Now, I do kind of just want to talk about the deck that I built and the funny way that I got to it. So, going in, last year I had played Esper, and this year I was like, I kind of want to do something a little, different. I want to be more on the attacking side. So I was hoping for like a Gruul or a Boros Commander, something I could just slap together and, go to town. Instead, I ended up opening a Kyodai Soul of Kamigawa. So, for those of you that don't know, it's 3 and a white for a 3/3 Dragon Spirit. It has Flash, Flying, and when it enters the battlefield, another target permanent gains Indestructible for as long as you control Kyodai. It also has an activation for Wooburg, or white, blue, black, red, green, to give itself +5/+5 until end of turn. So I took a look at this and I said, well, at the very least, I have an 8/8 commander in the air, So the funniest thing, though, was our pod actually supported 2 5-color decks. So in our pot of 4, we had the person across from me ended up building black-red. I was in the pod with the Commander Mechanic, and he was next to me, and he ended up building Gruul with the Gruul Atali, which is a spicy card. And then the gentleman that was sitting diagonal from me was actually the guy who won the previous Commander Sealed tournament. And he ended up opening Gigantha and Niv-Mizzet Reborn. So he just asked everybody at the table for any 2-color cards that we weren't going to play, and in turn gave us the stuff with double pips that he couldn't play. So thanks to him, I actually ended up with an Ancient Gold Dragon, which is 5 white for a 7/10 Elder Dragon. It has Flying, and whenever Ancient Gold Dragon deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20, you create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature tokens with flying equal to the result. This card is the reason I won the one game that I did. I just had too many things on the board, and they could not remove them. I also opened the Ancient Bronze Dragon in my packs, which is the 5 green 7/7 Elder Dragon with Flying. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20. When you do, you put X +1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures where X is the result. Unfortunately, I never did get a chance to get this into play, but the way we would want to do this would be get the Bronze Dragon out, and then the turn when we can swing with it, flash in Kyodai, and then put the counters on the 2 dragons. I did get to live the pipe dream because I opened a Defense of the Heart, which is a 3 and a green enchantment, and during your upkeep, if one of your opponents controls 3 or more creatures, you can sacrifice it to search your library for up to 2 creature cards, put those cards into play, and then shuffle your library. I almost got it off once, and I scared them too much with my commander, and immediately removed the Defense of the Heart, which was the correct thing to do. Now, I did have some discipline when building this deck. I tried not to put too many like double pip things in, and then failed miserably. One of them I don't count though. That's the Street Wraith, because it was never there to actually be played. It was always there to cycle to get another card. But again, it does have double pips. So does the Topaz Dragon, the Silverback Shaman, the Greater Sandworm, obviously the 2 Elder Dragons I just talked about, Amethyst Dragon, and then moving out of creatures and into instants, I have a Dream Fracture and an Ice Out, which are both 2 blue. I have a Return to Dust, which is double white. I have a Stoke the Flames, which is double red. And then looking into my sorceries, I have an Aminatu's Augury, which is double blue. An Austere Command, which is double white. Mythos of Snapdax, which is double white, but also wants you to have black and red in there. And then the most egregious of them all was the Ascend from Avernus, which is X, white, white, white for a sorcery. Return all creatures and planeswalker cards with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Exile Ascend from Avernus. I never actually had this come up in my game, or any of my games, but the way I split my mana base up, I knew that my heaviest colors were green and white, so I just loaded mostly the green and white basics, and any split lands I had that hit either green or white, and red, because red was my third most used color. Yeah, so I ended up with honestly, it was a pretty fun build. I did also try and jam as much ramp as I could in this deck. I did not open Soul Ring or an Arcane Signet, which would have been available in the Commander Masters packs and the Commander Legends packs. But I did end up with a Commander Sphere, a Decanter of Endless Water, an Inherited Envelope, a Stone Speaker Crystal, a Zargoth Crystal, and just an old favorite, Meteorite. So yeah, I do have the deck up on my Archidect. It's under Commander's Forge, Commander Sealed 2023 deck 5-color pile, if you want to take a look at it. But yeah, that's kind of all I got for this part. I had a great time, and then I went to work for the week, and that kicked my ass. I'm just, between work and the weather, I feel like just curling up and taking a nap. But I can't. I got stuff to do. So I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we're going to talk about a deck I built, because that's what I do when I'm bored, is I just build decks. So I will see you in, I don't know, a minute or two. Alright. Hey, I just want to take a minute to tell you about my Patreon. I know times are hard for everybody, and I know it isn't easy to shuffle around bills and stuff. Believe me, I know that. But If you would like to help support the podcast and me, you can find the links to my Patreon in my link tree, which is always put into the description of either the video or the audio, wherever you're listening to it. It would really mean the world to me. Honestly, I'm just struggling to make ends meet most weeks. But that's it. That's all. If you want to help, the links will be where you can find them. And welcome back. Now, I did attend the pre-release for Wilds of Eldraine with my cousin, and I ended up picking up the Commander decks. And I was looking through the blue-black Faeries deck, and I was like, you know what, I might build this out. And so I did. Now, the thing is, the blue-black Faeries deck comes with 5 legendary creatures that could be your commander, and then an honorable mention that's mono-black. So let's just go through them real quick. The mono-black one is Rankle, Master of Pranks. 2 black for a 3/3 Fairy Rogue with Flying Haste. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you can choose any number, which is each player discards a card, each player loses 1 life and draws a card, and each player sacrifices a creature. Now, getting into the ones that could helm the deck, we have the Face Commander, which is Tagwell, Duke of Splendor. 1 a blue and a black for a 2/3 Fairy Noble with Flying, Death Touch, and other fairies you control get +1/+1. Whenever another fairy you control dies, you may draw a card and lose a life. Next up, in the new fairies we could use as commanders, we have Alila, Cunning Conqueror, 2 blue-black for a 2/4 Fairy Warlock with Flying. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, create a 1/1 black Fairy Rogue creature token with Flying. Whenever one or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, go target creature that player controls. Next up in the deck as new creatures that could be your commander, we have Obira, Dreaming Duelist, which is a blue and a black for a 2/2 Fairy Warrior with Flash, Flying, and whenever another fairy enters a battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. Also included in the deck is the old favorite, Una, Queen of the Fae, which is 3 and then 3 hybrid Dimir. It is a 5/5 Fairy Wizard with Flying, and you can pay X and a hybrid Dimir and choose a color. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. For each card of the chosen color exiled this way, create a 1/1 blue and black Fairy Rogue creature token with Flying. And finally included in the deck is Nimrus, Una's Trickster. 3 blue-black for a 1/6 Fairy Knight with Flash, Flying, and whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So I noticed each of them kind of has a backup commander, right? So Alila wants you to cast spells on your opponent's turn, so does Nimrus, so they kind of go together, if that makes sense. And then Obira wants you to make fairies, and Una helps you make fairies. And then Tagwell works with Rankle because if you can continually sacrifice like fairy tokens, you're, controlling the board, but you're also drawing cards. And I didn't go with any of them, because when we went to the pre-release, I ended up pulling a Talion the Kindly Lord, which is 2 a blue and a black for a 3/4 Fairy Noble with Flying. As Talion the Kindly Lord enters the battlefield, choose a number between 1 and 10. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to the chosen number, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So this brought up a little discussion of, in Commander, what is the best number? And I think, by and large, it's going to be 3. And here's my breakdown for that. If you look at the bell curve of a mana cost of a deck, it typically spikes at 3 and then starts coming down at 4, which typically means that's where you're going to have the most cards. Now, the next argument I have is for 2. But this is more based on power and toughness. There is still like the everyone running 2 mana rocks fine. But next time you sit down at a commander table, just look at commanders and like the first 4 turns of a game and count the number of things that get cast with 2 CMC or have a power and toughness of 2, and I think you could still make that argument. Now, I also have a very fringe argument for 1 that is specifically against token decks. It's also a good way to deck yourself against a token deck. But that said, let's get into some of what's included in the deck, because I know I'm already running a little long. So let's get into it. Okay, so since I decided to take the deck in the Faeries typal archetype, let's talk about the cards that are in there and that I put in there to help reflect that. And yes, that is a pun on words for the first one, which is Reflections of Littjara, which was included in the precon. It's 4 and a blue for an enchantment. When it enters, you choose a creature type, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, you copy that spell. After that, we have the 2 cards from the Kindred cycle that are in this color. The Kindred Dominance was included in the deck. That's 5 black for a sorcery. Choose a creature type, destroy all creatures that aren't of that creature type. And then the one that I added is Kindred Discovery, which is 3 blue for an enchantment. Enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. Now, you might be asking yourself, is this a good way to deck myself? And the answer to that is yes. And part of the reason why I'm not running a ton of other card draw in here is because, well, the commander is going to draw me cards. The Kindred Discovery will draw me cards. There's other fairies in the deck that will draw me cards. So I didn't need like the traditional stuff to draw cards. Next up in that list we have Icon of Ancestry, 3 mana artifact. Enters, choose a creature type. Creatures of the type get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 and tap it to look at the top 3 cards and reveal a creature of the chosen type from them, and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Then we have our Glen Elendra Liege, which is 1 and then 3 Hybrid Dimir for a 2/3 Fairy Knight with flying, which gives other blue creatures you control +1/+1 and other black creatures you control +1/+1. So even if all my creatures aren't both colors, they're all going to get at least +1/+1 from the Liege. Next up we have Scion of Una, 2 and a blue for a 1/1 Fairy Soldier with flash, flying. Other fairies you control get +1/+1, and other fairies you control have Shroud. He's a very good card. And finally, in the typal stuff, we have the 1 black mark that will be in the deck because I can't change the card. Bitter Blossom, 1 and a black for a tribal enchantment fairy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and you make a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. Again, not much I can do about that. Well, they are no longer going to refer to the archetype as tribal and are moving to typal. Can't change the tribal enchantments, unfortunately. Maybe they'll find a way to do it in later stuff, like maybe when we go back to Lorwyn. But let's get into some of the creatures, because I did have one fairly big restriction on the creatures that I included. Now, the restriction was they couldn't just be a creature, right? They had to do something. Like, even the ones I just mentioned are lords. So they had to work like a spell in most cases, or do something that affected my board. And the first few actually are also spells. And those are fairies with adventures. First up, we have Brazen Bower, which is 1 blue for a 3/1 with flash flying and can only block creatures with flying. But it has an adventure called Petty Theft. For 1 and a blue, it's an instant. Return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Next up, we have the Picklock Prankster, which is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 with flying and vigilance. But it also has the adventure Free the Fae for 1 and a blue. Mill 4 cards and put an instant sorcery or fairy card from among the milled cards into your hand. Spellscorn Coven is 3 and a black for a 2/3 fairy warlock with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. And it has the adventure Take It Back, which is 2 and a blue for an instant. Return target spell to its owner's hand. Hypnotic Sprite is blue for a 2/1 fairy with flying, but it has Mesmeric Gaze as an adventure, 2 and a blue. Counter target spell with mana value 3 or less. Now, after them, we just get into the things that do other things, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them. I just pulled 5 to kind of highlight because we're already past the 20-minute mark. Snaremaster Sprite, single blue mana for a 1/1 fairy wizard with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. When you do, tap a creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Stingblade Assassin is 3 and a blue for a 3/1 fairy assassin with flash flying, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Glen Elendra Archmage is 3 and a blue for a 2/2 fairy wizard with flying. You can pay a blue, sacrifice the Archmage, and counter target non-creature spell, and it has Persist, which means if it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on it, it will come back with a -1/-1 counter, so this kind of gives you 2 counter spells. Next up, we have Sower of Temptation, 2 blue for a 2/2 fairy wizard. It has flying, and when Sower of Temptation enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature for as long as Sower of Temptation remains on the battlefield. And then the last one is going to be Mocking Sprite. 2 and a blue for a 2/1 fairy rogue with flying. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So that should tell you there is still a number of instant and sorceries in the deck, but I'm not going to take the time to go through them. Eventually I will get this deck list up on my Archidect. I just don't know when, because free time is not something I have at the moment. So that said, I'm gonna cut it off here, and I hope you have a good whatever time you happen to listen to this. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulpey of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending, along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.